Alrighty, good evening, everybody. It is 8:30 p.m., April 3rd, 2025. Welcome back to the Weather Center. Tonight, we are going to be talking about our first heavy hitter preseason forecast for the 2025 hurricane season, and we have a decent amount to dig into, so I'm going to rapidly get through the introduction tonight. Say hello to everybody. I hope that you've had a spectacular week up to this point. It is Friday Eve, Thursday night, getting closer and closer to the weekend, the first weekend of April. I can't believe we're already into April. It goes to show how fast time is going. We're going to break down as much as we can tonight in the short period of time, but don't fret. Make sure you have questions, whether it be in the chat or after the fact. Drop them in the comments section down below. We're going to be streaming again on Saturday before, I should say, I have to do the morning show that day, so I will be available in the evening. So we're going to be streaming again on Saturday once we get our European seasonal data. With that being said, let's get into this. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I see the chat is popping off. Make sure you nudge that like button as fast as you can so we can get this information out to everybody. We're going to break it down as best as we can. First and foremost, let's take a look at the current infrared satellite out there. The tropics are still quiet, and they are going to remain that way, but there's a couple things out there I want to show you towards the back end of the update once we get through all the information that I want to cover. We also still have our trough deepening over the western half of the United States, driving a cold plunge through the Rockies, and as well spurring up some pretty severe weather action going on through the Ohio-Mississippi Valley, through Tennessee, Kentucky, into the lower Midwestern states. We had an extensive, a big-time severe weather outbreak and tornado outbreak yesterday evening. It was wild. A lot of tornadic activity that was ongoing yesterday. I didn't even want to stream it, to tell you the truth, and not only because we already had it covered down, but there was just so much going on that it would have taken forever and a day to fully get caught up. Easily the worst outbreak of the year so far, hands down, and it is still ongoing for the next 24, if not 48 hours and beyond that. The rest of us out there are pretty quiet, though. The Southeast, Florida in particular, we haven't had very much going on. We had a couple of stray showers try to form up as we had a bit of a collision of our sea breeze earlier this afternoon. I noticed that as I was on my way over to the gym. Central America, the Caribbean, very quiet. Puerto Rico looking pretty solid right now. They just got that good old easterly trade wind fetch going on out there. Nothing in terms of significant cloud cover or thunderstorms pretty much anywhere out there across the board. ITCZ still smothered down to the south. You can't even see it because it's behind my head. So all is well out there in the tropics. Currently, we do have a very dominant ridge built in over the eastern United States, over the western Atlantic, an extension of it down into the Caribbean, which is driving all that warm, unstable air right into the deep south, the Gulf coastline, and up further into the interior eastern United States. And that's why we have such a severe weather event ongoing. Collision of fresh polar air with all sorts of maritime tropical air being forced up. Our models are actually forecasting we can get into the mid to upper 90s potentially here in central Florida, so that is very interesting to see. But enough of the current conditions. Let's talk the numbers. Drum roll, please, everybody. Bam. So here we go. The 2025 hurricane season forecast, the April forecast from Colorado State University, calls for a total of 17 named storms. 17 named storms, and truthfully, fully on board with that. Fully on board with that. I'm very glad that they went with about 17, 18. That was something I was thinking they were going to do, or I should say I was hoping that they were going to do. Not that I was thinking it. Let me take that back. But I was hoping that they would kind of follow suit with the 15 to 18 named storm average that we have out there. So far, a lot of our other forecast entities have mentioned about 14 to 18, 15 to 18. WESH going a little higher than that. They went, I believe, 16 to or 17 to 20 named storms. Still a potential. I'll show you the spread that they have for us in their full breakdown. Named storm days, 85. So about half of the hurricane season is what they're forecasting could possibly be spent with a named storm on the board. 9 total hurricanes are forecast, with a total of 35 forecasted hurricane days. So the full 180-day window of the hurricane season from June 1st to November 30th, they're predicting we could have 35 of those days spent with hurricanes out there. Seems a little low, which leads me and a couple others behind the scenes to think they may not be expecting too much in the way of long-track, long-duration hurricanes. They could be possibly focusing in on the ones that may try to form close to home, which might not be too good. Another thing is they're going for 4 major hurricanes with only 9 major hurricane days. Only 9. When you think about it, last hurricane season, I believe we had a total of 4 to 5, if not 6 total major hurricane days just from Beryl at the start of the hurricane season. So it goes to show they might be on the same track as what WeatherBell was suggesting. And in fact, actually, you know what? I apologize. I don't mean to derail the briefing, but I know that WeatherBell is supposed to update their tropical outlook. Let me see if they've done that just yet. I don't think they have. No, not yet. Not yet, because I know they're going to be updating it in April. I thought maybe they would have dropped their information now. But anyways, let's get back to CSU. So they're thinking 9 major hurricane days. And if you think about it, when we had Milton and Helene, we only had about 2 days with those storms being major hurricanes, 1 or 2 days. I think it was 1 day with Helene, because Helene took about an additional 12 to 18 hours to go major hurricane strength before pummeling the Big Bend of Florida. And then we spent 2 days with Milton, 2, maybe 2.5 days with Milton as a major hurricane, because it all happened so fast. So this could be one way or another. They're either thinking we won't have very many intense hurricanes, or they could potentially be thinking, especially when you compare the total number of named storms to the amount of majors and regular hurricanes, they might be thinking there could be a lot of close-to-home threats in the Caribbean, in the Gulf, right off the southeast coast of the United States. And then on top of that, if you look, one thing that does stand out to me is they are still forecasting 155, give or take, total ACE units, which if you all recall, that is only 4 units away from hyperactive. So they are still thinking this could be a fairly busy hurricane season with a total of 93 ACE forecast west of 60. So that would put all of us in the Caribbean, Bermuda, and further towards the west, the east coast of the U.S., and further closer to the Western Caribbean, the Gulf, etc., at risk of seeing a landfall. Here is a full breakdown of their information, and we're going to start off with one thing I want to describe first and foremost. Let me see. I'm going to scroll on through here. There's one chart that I wanted to pull up for you all so we can kind of deep dive into what they're... Here we go. All right, so I wanted to talk to you all about this because, believe it or not, I see some folks in the chat right now talking about conservative bullish. They actually are indeed being conservative. Some folks are saying that Phil is going bullish, but based on the data that they have at their disposal, they're actually being fairly frugal, especially after what happened last hurricane season. And I think that makes sense. I really do think it makes sense, and I think a lot of us out there are going to be a lot more frugal with the hurricane forecasts because of the fact last year had a lot of erroneous periods, had a lot of anomalously quiet phases during what should have been the peak of the hurricane season. If you look, the European model forecasts a total of 19 named storms. The UK Met Office, 18 named storms. The JMA, 19 named storms. And the Canadian actually forecasts a whopping 21 named storms. Their final forecast is 17, so they went down. Total named storm days, if you look, the Euro has about 90, the UK Met about 87, the JMA, the Japanese model, about 91, and the Canadian 105. You can round up to 106. They went with only 85, so they're on the backside of the total forecasted data. If you look at the Euro versus the Canadian versus all of our other models here, on average, they're looking at about 10 hurricanes forecasted. They went with 9, so they went on the lower side. Same thing with the major hurricane. Actually, I should say the major hurricanes, they're kind of right on par between 4 to 5 major hurricanes, and that's roughly their split. Then if you also look, every single one of the computer models actually forecasts hyperactive ACE. 170 from the Euro, 164 from the Met Office, 174 from the JMA, and then a whopping 209 from the Canadian. They once again went on the lower side, 155. And then overall net tropical cyclone activity, the forecast calls for 135% above average total Atlantic cyclone activity. Just means, the number of named storms we get out there, the total accumulation of ACE, named storms, hurricane, all of it clumped together. We're at about 185, or the spread is 179 to 223, and they once again went on the lower side. So they are definitely sticking to the low end of things. I thought that was very interesting. Here's a breakdown of our analogs. I have all of the analogs pulled up so we can take a look at what the hurricane seasons looked like. We have 1996, 1999, 2006, 2008, 2011, and then their number one is 2017. That's the one that we're going to have to watch out for. 2017 was a heavy-hitting hurricane season, as we're all very familiar with, the Irmas and the Marias and whatnot. All of these do have a very similar track scheme to them, and it's beautiful that when we started to speculate our own hurricane season theories on this channel back in December, back in portions of January and February, if you all recall, we were thinking Eastern Gulf, eastern half of the United States, and then some recurvatures out into the Atlantic. They're pretty much on the same page, so it's nice to know that we are not out to lunch in terms of what it is that we've been theorizing on the channel. Let's continue on through here. Here's another grand scheme look at what our computer models are thinking. This is a breakdown. You could see that in comparison to all the average numbers. Let me just draw that in. All the average statistical data that they have at their disposal, they all erred on the lower side of it. On average, they're looking at 18 named storms. They went with 17. On average, they're thinking a total of 90 hurricane or named storm days. They went with 85. 9 hurricanes forecasted are pretty right on the money with that. Same thing with the hurricane days. They're pretty close on the money with that. But then the ACE and the tropical cyclone activity is where it kind of differentiates. 170 being for ACE, which would be hyperactive again. 155 is what they went with, which would keep us in that above average activity. But it's very interesting to see that the models are still wanting to push us into hyperactive state. TRG Tornado, thank you so much for tuning in. And One Nation Weather, I did see you in the chat as well. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. One thing is for certain, though. They have expressed in this breakdown that they are, not completely, but they are very, very uncertain of a lot of different variables. And the number one thing is this right here, the ENSO. They are against an actual El Nino really beginning to build in. They are very against it. They do not feel confident at all at leaving an El Nino on the table here. They are leaning more towards an ENSO neutral, a cool neutral at that, based on the cool anomalies that are still present over the central equatorial Pacific. They did mention, however, and this goes back to that level of uncertainty that they want to express, especially in this precursor outlook back in April. They did say if there is a sudden and anomalous weakening in the Pacific trade winds, then some of this warmth that's right off the coast of South America could try to bleed further in. We could be looking at a warm neutral to a weak ENSO El Nino, give or take out there, if the trade winds were to break down that dramatically. They don't think they will. If you look at the anomalies here on the Havmöller index or the Havmöller chart, we do have a fairly robust push of easterly trade winds all the way through. These have been observed, and then here is your forecasted look at the trade winds, and you notice that they are still forecasting a pretty pronounced amount of easterlies out there over the 3.4 and the 4 region, even out through to the end of April. This is, if you think about it, looking at the top of it here, I'm going to try to break it down as best as I can. We've seen these charts before, so this is a time phase chart. The higher up you go, the further back in time you get. The further down you go, the further out ahead of time you get, or further out in time you get. This would be the international dateline, 180 degrees longitude. That's right pretty much the center of the Pacific Ocean. The further east you go, or the west you go from there, you get closer to the maritime continents. The further east you go, you get closer to North and South America. So as you can see, we are still looking at fairly decent easterly trades, keeping the waters upwelled out there over the equatorial Pacific. So they're thinking neutral at best. Here's another bit of the predictions from the ENSO there. This is something we looked at during our last discussion. Most of the models, and it says here, Most models call for either ENSO neutral or La Nina conditions for August through October. The black arrow delineates the peak of the hurricane season, figure courtesy of the International Research Institute. We looked at this during our last update, and they're sticking to it. They're thinking neutral to maybe even a weak La Nina for the peak of the hurricane season. This is also something we saw not too long ago in our own update, and we're going to rehash it once we get all the April information. And we all know the song and dance. We all know the song and dance. This is a look at our current SST breakdown out there, and one very interesting piece that they mentioned during the actual live discussion at the National Tropical Weather Conference is it was because of the super El Nino that we had in 2023 that resulted in the stability issues. At least based on their findings, they concluded that it was because of the El Nino of 2023 into 2024 that we were left with the stratospheric stability issues. We had a warm atmosphere over extremely warm waters, so lapse rates were not conducive for tropical convection. We didn't have a ton of lift because, unfortunately, there was just heat everywhere. So my working theory, to tell you the truth, is if we've had a bit of a La Nina to a neutral phase out there in the equatorial Pacific and the Atlantic on the eastern side has cooled, that to me would symbolize that where our warmest anomalies are is where our warmest and unstable air is going to be positioned, since we've been under these cool anomalies for about a little over a year now. And I know that sounds a little far-fetched, but hear me out. I'll try to step you through it without getting completely scatterbrained, because that tends to happen to me a lot. But anyways, if you think back to 2023, it was hot everywhere. The Atlantic was the second warmest on record, with a lot of that heat loaded up to Western Africa, the Canary Current, Western Europe. And then we started to slowly cool down as you progressed further towards the west, but regardless, it was hot everywhere. The entirety of the Pacific was extremely warm. And in fact, I'll just go ahead and pull this up so I can kind of paint the picture of what my theory is. This is a new theory that I came up with after hearing them mention that they believe it was the El Nino that caused issues. So let's go to 2023. We'll pull this up, and then I'll switch us to the international dateline so I can put us over the ENSO regions. Here we go. So yeah, if you look, let me go to 180, and then we'll plot it, and then we'll break it down. So they're saying that because of look at this, guys. All this was extremely hot. Everything was hot in 2023. We had an anomalously warm everything for the Atlantic, from the mid-latitudes, from the poles, all the way down to the equator. And then we all know, and we're very familiar with how strong of an El Nino that we had during that hurricane season. And even through the tornado season was crazy for us in the southeast because of how strong the El Nino was. If you look at the PDO, we had extreme warmth loaded up through the central and western North Pacific. So we had a lot of heat everywhere. If we fast forward to 2024, it really didn't get very much better. It didn't get much better. We didn't see very much of an improvement. In fact, if you look, the only thing that changed was the ENSO kind of cooled a little bit, but it is still extremely hot everywhere. If you come back to their latest findings here, and in fact, we'll just come over here and I'll pull up, here we go. I'll pull up the current heat index out there. We'll go to the SSTs, if this will load up, and we'll go to the anomaly chart and click on this. Now, if you look, we are definitely a lot more toned in or reined in. If you look, the Atlantic is not nearly as warm. We still have some warm anomalies. A lot of the warmth is focused in the Gulf, but the Atlantic has definitely come down. If you look at the equatorial Pacific, we have pretty good cool anomalies still hanging out there. And if you guys recall, this anomalous warmth, the El Nino conditions in the 1+2 and the 3 only started to take shape over the last month and a half. So we've definitely brought it in a little bit. We've reined in all this heat. And that was something else I was speculating during last hurricane season. All this heat can't entirely be a good thing. You know, they always say too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And all that heat, according to CSU, is what created the stability issues, which makes sense. You have a warm atmosphere, you have really warm water, you're only going to have a conditionally unstable, if that, in terms of, say, for instance, a skew-T when forecasting a thunderstorm. You want cold air aloft, warm air down at the surface if you really want those conducive environmental conditions to create robust lift. And in this case, that's what tropical cyclones thrive off of, that latent heat exchange and lift inside the storm. So if those parcels are rising, and it's just warm air above warm air, warm air above warm water, it's not going to do very much. And on top of that, the heat probably contributed to all the wave breaking and the anticyclonic wave breaking and the dry air that we saw plummeting on the east side of the Atlantic. So the fact that we've cooled off, and I did see, I forget who it was, but somebody in the chat had mentioned that someone out there, I'm not going to name drop anybody, but there are a few people who are very, very bearish on this hurricane season. They really think nothing's going to happen. They really do think that CSU is going way too hard. They're thinking maybe 12, 14 named storms. I don't think we're going to see that little. I think the days of only getting 9, 10, 12 named storms are gone. We are just so warm out there that regardless, even if we don't classify systems, we're going to have sloppy spin-ups. Like we probably saw last year. You can make a case we probably had more 19, 20 named storms last year than we actually realized. We probably missed Isaac, and I think we missed, who was it? Either Nadine or Oscar at one point. So we'll see. Let's get back to the information, though. So that's my working theory, is we might actually have a bit more of a conducive environment now that the Atlantic has toned itself down a little bit, particularly right off the coast of Africa, as well as being situated underneath La Nina to cool neutral conditions for about a year now. So we'll have to see. And there was one last thing. Here we go. This is what I really wanted to cover before we break down each of our analog hurricane seasons. So first and foremost, these are the probabilities of a tropical cyclone or a hurricane or a major hurricane tracking within 50 nautical miles of the coastline of each state. Right out of the gate, Florida is number one. Again, we take the cake. They only dropped us 4% in comparison to last year. Last year they had us at a 96% that we see a named storm or more than one named storm track within 50 miles of our coastline. We're at 92%, folks. So truthfully, given ENSO neutral and the positioning of our semi-permanent pressure systems already, I would say if you live in the state of Florida, you should just start your preparations now. Just get everything dusted off, have things ready to rock and roll, especially if we have any close proximity spin-ups like Milton, like Helene, like Debbie. Last year, that was the name of the game. If you all really sit and think about it, Floridians really did not have an opportunity to watch something track across the Atlantic and pace ourselves with getting ready. Helene formed within a couple days. We had 2 days. Debbie, we knew it was coming, but it really would never develop until it was south of Cuba and then already off our west coast. Then it finally got its act together. Milton, we all know how that took place. It formed up first couple days of October, and then it made landfall on the 9th of October. I believe it was a total of like 4 or 5 days we spent with Milton. So we haven't really had any long track African easterly wave that we could watch from way out in the Atlantic and say, okay, this is probably coming our way. We have 7 to 10 days to prepare. No, we've had boom, 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 2 to 3 days maximum to prepare. And most of these systems, Helene and Milton examples, rapidly intensifying systems. And then on top of this, one thing I really like is the fact that every hotspot that we have highlighted here on the channel, they have the percentages to back us up. So it looks like CSU, Dr. Phil Klotzbach, everybody on their research team is on the same page as we are, that we've been discussing since January. If you look, Alabama, 67%, Florida, 92%, Georgia, 72%, Louisiana, 74%. If you look here, Mississippi, 62%, North Carolina, 76%, Texas, 70%, and then South Carolina, 66%. Everything else drops off pretty considerably, minus Virginia, which still adds up with our mid-Atlantic chart. There's 54% for Virginia, or not chart, but 54% for the mid-Atlantic being a hotspot. And if you guys recall, I'll come back over here to the actual satellite image. We've been mentioning that we're going to have to watch from the eastern boot of Louisiana to the west coast of Florida, all the way through the mid-Atlantic and possibly into the Northeast are going to be our most favorable areas. They do have eastern Texas as a hot spot as well. That's the only difference, and I don't know about that one. I think we would need to have something either track in early, something form close, or something get dropped off the coast and then retrograde back into the coastline of Texas. So I thought that was also very interesting. We have a 65% shot at seeing a hurricane within 50 nautical miles of the Florida coast, 35% shot at a major hurricane. And you can see the only other states with double-digit amounts are the ones we've been looking at: Alabama, Louisiana, South Carolina, Texas. Surprisingly, they don't have North Carolina on there. That was a little weird, but either way. So we're still kind of on the money. We're still not out to lunch. We're not completely looking wide right or wide left. CSU is kind of confirming that we've been thinking in line with what is forecast to happen. The professional, I mean, we're a professional page, but regardless, they've been doing tropical meteorology for a lot longer than I have, and it's nice to see that we can draw a conclusion alongside them. Last but certainly not least, before we go into analogs, the big question marks with this season's predictions are if anomalous warmth in the eastern subtropical Atlantic and Caribbean persists and expands to the remainder of the Atlantic MDR or begins to weaken. In addition, there is considerable uncertainty as to what phase ENSO will be in for the peak of the hurricane season. While El Nino seems unlikely, the realm of possibility spans anywhere from weak La Nina to warm neutral. So there is still a large margin of error, and that's one thing that we have to be very, very conscientious of. I believe there was a chart. Let me see. Spread. Would spread be a way to look that up? Let me see. Yeah, here we go. One last little piece of info I want to show you all before we move on is just the spread here, so we can cut them some slack. So if you look, they have 17 named storms, but they have a spread of 14 to 20. They have 85 named storm days with a spread of 62 to 109. The ACE west of 60, they have a spread of 57 to 136. And then the total ACE, they have 155, but we have a big old spread of either 102, which is about average, or 215, which is definitely well into hyperactive. So there is a big spread here. We just got to make sure to keep that in mind. All right, here is our first analog. This is hurricane season 1996. And if you look, key takeaways here: mid-Atlantic, east coast of Florida, the Caribbean are going to be our hot zones. Regardless, you guys are always on the front lines with this. We had one Milton-esque storm that snuck in under the radar in 1996 for northern Florida. 1999, very, very similar song and dance. A lot of action moving just to the immediate north of the Greater Antilles. The Bahamas, the Mid-Atlantic, east coast of Florida, and unfortunately West Florida are also still going to be on guard. Same thing with the Caribbean islands. The Caribbean islands, I know Mr. Man JJ likes to ask. Windward Islands, yes. Puerto Rico, yes. We need to be paying close attention. 2006, if I'm not mistaken, was a bit more of an El Nino year. I could be wrong. Let me look that up real quick, because I know they had one or two El Nino analogs in there. I want to say 06 was an El Nino year. And that's why if you notice, we have a lot more of that recurvature signal, but regardless, we still had some slop moving through Florida and the Caribbean and the Mid-Atlantic. So our hot spots are definitely well identified here in these analogs. And yes, that's right, PM. Actually, I remember my dad and I watching Floyd closely in 1999. I'm pretty sure this was Floyd right here. This was Floyd right there. It came dangerously close as a major hurricane, and then bam, smacked into North and South Carolina. And then we have 2008. 2008 is a bit more of a mixed bag. Definitely a bit more of a mixed bag. You have some subtropical action, a couple long trackers that just couldn't quite hold it steady. The Caribbean was rocked. Florida was definitely rocked. And then we also had some Louisiana and Texas impacts. I personally don't see this taking shape. I really don't. That's just me. I'm sorry. I could be wrong, and I hope that never mind. I'm going to take that previous statement back. I hope I'm right, because we don't need that many landfalls into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. So I could be wrong, though. I definitely think a lot of our focus is going to be in this general area. I really do. I think that's where our focus is going to be. We could have some sneaky systems try to fly under the radar, develop at the last second, and move through the Yucatan, the Bay of Campeche, and then up into Texas or Louisiana. We'll have to see. Then we have 2011. 2011 also could be a very, very synonymous track scheme with this hurricane season. I do think we're still going to get things that are going to try to move a little further towards the west, but I do agree with this kind of a spread. I do. But a lot of it hinges more so directly on what the ENSO and what our Atlantic sea surface temperatures do. And then last but not least, 2017, the big one, the elephant in the room, which pretty much nailed everybody. We had a little bit of action everywhere through the Gulf. This would line up with Wesch's predictions, with the Gulf entirely being a hot spot. Obviously, Irma and Maria are the ones that really stand out here. Puerto Rico was nailed by Hurricane Maria. And then we also had Irma, which was a long track Category 5 that moved from east of the Lesser Antilles all the way as a 5 till its landfall into Cuba. So we're going to have to watch for the Irmas this hurricane season. I really do think, in my opinion, that, something like that could take shape. And then obviously we had Harvey in 2017 as well. Look at the rapid intensification on Harvey. It went from a tropical storm to a major hurricane in just a couple blips there. Ridiculous. And I think that is what they're predicting could happen. We could have a lot of close-to-home spin-ups in this general area because that is where our warmth is focused. It's cooler out here for now, but if that African monsoon does persist like our climate models are predicting, and we get at least a residual Bermuda Azores high out here to drive these waves off towards the west, get them into the Caribbean, get them off the southeast coast, that is when we'll have to watch. That is definitely when we'll have to watch, in my personal opinion. We'll have to see. All right, so one last thing I wanted to show you all before we get ready to open the floor to questions is the CFS keeps trending towards a fairly active look for the next couple of months. If you look, this is April, so we're already expecting an increase in our precipitation out there for the Caribbean. This is May. May looks fairly anomalous out there. June looks fairly busy out there, and then I'm surprised that July has such an active signature to it as well. If you look, July, we're already kind of rocking with a northward bound ITCZ, West African monsoon. Right there, you can kind of see the thunderstorms already ongoing. Some folks are speculating that could really suppress a lot of the dust that we get out there this hurricane season. We'll have to see. I may have to look back at old satellite archives to see if we had that type of... I'm pretty sure we did. We had some massive waves out there coming off of Africa in 2024, and it really didn't do too much for our Saharan air layer. So I don't know if I would put a lot of faith in that speculation. I think the Saharan dust is still up in the air, a variable that we're not going to really have a grasp on until it's June, July, etc. But this here, I think, is a telltale sign that we're at least expecting a neutral, no pun intended, Atlantic high-pressure subtropical ridge out there. Because you can see a lot of this does not look to escape towards the north. It all just kind of compacts right in through there. That's our greatest area of precip anomalies. And that's for July. We'll have to see what happens. And then I'll leave you with this before we open it up to questions. I've been watching the GFS Long Range Ensemble quite a bit in recent days, just for the fun of it. And I'll show you towards the back end of April into May. If you look, the ensembles are already starting to get that active look on it. I mean, look at that. There's the East Pac. There goes the Caribbean. We already have a bunch of little... look at that. That's pretty wild. I know that obviously we're at 700, 800 hours into the future, but that is a very aggressive signal for possible tropical activity in both AORs. Look at that. There it is. We already have our first little erroneous landfall for Florida. Look at that. Little tropical storm coming into southwest Florida at the beginning of May. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen. Don't take that with a whole bunch of confidence or anything. Don't take that serious, but... I just find it funny that there is one ensemble member that tracks up from out of the Caribbean and then finds its way into Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, Florida. But no, the key takeaway here is, and what I want to the reason I want to conclude this discussion with this here is we're getting close. I'm not looking at this in terms of, oh, we're going to get a named storm at the very end of April, early May. No, what I'm looking at here is the fact that our ensembles are showing these members, a lot of members. I mean, look at that. That's a pretty active signal for the East Pack. I'm not showing you this so we can start to draw conclusions on when we'll get our first named storm in either AOR. No, what I'm showing you here is the clock is ticking. The models were not showing this a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, a month ago. They were not showing a single ensemble member out there. Now we're starting to see long-range models, including the mid-range CFS for late April and May, trying to spin up tropical areas of low pressure. So this isn't to show you that the season's going to start early. This isn't to worry anybody that there's going to be landfalls in May. No, what I'm showing you here is simply the models are picking up on the fact that we're getting close to when the environment is going to start getting very, very favorable to support tropical cyclones. If you look at this, wind shear is expected to really drop. Look at the difference there. We're getting very close. This is through the month of April, and then watch what happens. Full collapse of our aggressive wind shear. And this would actually suggest that at least the GFS thinks we're not going to have any real intense El Nino-style conditions. So we'll have to wait and see what happens here. But this definitely does not seem like there's going to be a tremendous amount of wind shear out there as we get into... Yeah, look at that. We're already starting to see it begin to lift up. There's your difluence right along the monsoonal trough out there in the eastern Pacific. Obviously, the Atlantic is not fully woken up just yet, and that's not going to happen. So again, key takeaway with showing you this before I open up the floor to questions is we're getting close. If you think it's still too early to be talking about the hurricane season, if you think it's still too early to be worrying about what's going to happen this hurricane season, I would argue against that logic. Definitely would argue against that. Definitely. I'm still at a loss that it's already April 3rd. Time is flying by. And with that being said, a couple things. As I open the floor to questions, I just want to go back through the chat because we've had some amazing people in here. T.G. Herman with the $50 donation. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. A big thank you for that. A $50 donation from T.G. Herman. Very inspiring. Very grateful for that. 110%. Silver Steel S with the $20 donation. Enormous shout out to both of you. And then I saw my girl Kiara in here as well with a donation as well. Solid donation, 150%. Thank you. There she goes with a $20 dono. So thank you, everybody, for the gracious donations. It sincerely means a lot. It's been a long day, so I needed that little pick-me-up for sure. So the gaming, I wouldn't necessarily say that New York City, Long Island could have an above-average hurricane season, but I would more or less restate that as New York City, Long Island could have an above-average risk for a landfalling tropical cyclone. That's how I would reword it. That's how I'd reword it. Not an above-average season for just New York City. That wouldn't make very much sense, but I know where you're going with that. I would say that New York City has a bit of an above-average shot at seeing something come very close, if not move right on in after making landfall near Cape Hatteras, or say, for instance, moving through the border of North and South Carolina up the eastern seaboard. We could see something like that. Some folks have mentioned that 2012 is an analog for this upcoming hurricane season, and that would be the year of the Sandy. So, Chris Mazzell with the $20 donation. You guys are a spectacular audience. I love you all for that. It means so much. Clara, thank you so much for your time and your professionalism. You're awesome. So glad that you're on. Of course, I told you this month was going to get busy. Today's Thursday. Mark your calendars. We're coming back again on Saturday to look over all the new Euro data. We're going to be getting very busy this month. Very busy. Stormcoder, excellent question. The CSU forecast did note a majority of the ACE being west of 60. Could that be due to the cooler eastern MDR? Possibly. Possibly, but they are anticipating there could be at least some warming that goes on between now and the start of the hurricane season, and especially August. Because that's another thing, too. We're not only projecting between now and June, we're also looking more so at the August, September, October time frame. So, but that's an excellent question. I do think that you're on the money with that, though. Ace west of 60 being 93, that's well over half of the ace. I really do think, just like Weather Bell had alluded to, we could possibly see more systems spin up closer to home than further away. You here? Good to see you. Thank you. Kevin, it's all good. Don't worry about it. Do you think Sarah will be a returning cycle for this year? I certainly do. That one scares me. It's possible. It's possible. Alabama, going to have to watch very closely. The Eastern Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. Somebody commented on that. Man, I'm so tired of having to go back and forth. The Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Mex-America, I don't know. Whatever pleases everybody out there. I'm so used to saying Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of something, the Gulf of everybody. The Gulf of the Northern Hemisphere. From Louisiana through to the west coast of Florida, you should be watching closely. The mid-Atlantic states from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and up towards even New York City, Atlantic Canada, should be watching very closely. Steering pattern, I'm going to give it a little more time to determine what the steering pattern looks like. I want to see what the April and May data shows us. And yes, I completely agree. That would give a lot less lead time to evacuate. That's what I was mentioning earlier on in the stream as well, is given the fact that they're forecasting only 9 major hurricane days, that leads me to believe that we're not anticipating very many long track systems. They're thinking there could be a lot of very close spin-ups from 60 degrees longitude and further west, which would put it inside the Caribbean or very close to the eastern United States, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, Bermuda, etc. It is way too difficult to answer that question, Clara. Do you think Texas will get a Harvey? Way too difficult. I'm not even going to try. Not even going to try, to tell you the truth. Because not only is it very difficult to pinpoint a landfall to the specific point like Harvey, but at the same time, we would need everything to come together for it to stall out, for it to rapidly intensify, for it to spin around and kind of just do nothing like Harvey did. Because that's what made Harvey so destructive, is the steering current pretty much collapsed. Just like with Debbie last hurricane season. A lot of folks forget Debbie, but Debbie was rough for northern Florida and Georgia because it got stuck in the pattern. Now, Daniel, remember that Helene didn't necessarily hit fast. We just didn't have very much time to prepare for it because it was so close to home. And yes, David Lay, YT, I do think the Central American Gyre is going to be a spot to really watch. And that really, for me, is because of how much warmth we have out there. Let's go over to, let's see, the Caribbean. Is that going to show it? Whoa, okay, I don't want to be that zoomed in. Let me zoom us out. If you look, a lot of our warmth and our OHC is concentrated in this general area. So truthfully, that's another little working theory that I have. It's a small one. It's not rooted in science, but it's just a thought. If we had the cooler waters in the equatorial Pacific, and now we have cooler waters off the east coast of the U.S. and on Africa, that would mean that we have a lot of focused lift and focused lower pressure over Central America, in the Caribbean, the Gulf, etc., which means when the MJO comes through and disrupts the overall wind pattern out there, we could see a quick formation of low pressure because we already have all that oomph being provided by the warmer waters. If you look at this map right here, I know it's extremely zoomed in, but the further east you go, you run into cool anomalies. You go further east, you run into the cool anomalies out here. The warmth is maximized right through here where the Central American Gyre would form up. The gyre takes on a formation like this. It's a large area of lower pressure focused over Central America. And then you get those little vorticity lobes that spin around it that could get slingshot in either direction. Man, I remember last hurricane season, I had so many haters in the chat. Why are you clickbaiting like that? I'm not clickbait. I'm literally describing the Central American Gyre. Things get slingshot in all sorts of directions, but that's neither here nor there. According to Dr. Brian McNabb, the hurricane expert, it's definitely possible for the Atlantic to support a 200-mile-per-hour hurricane under... Oh, yeah, absolutely. I really don't think we're going to see a 200-mile-per-hour hurricane. I would not want to try to forecast that, but, I mean, if you wanted to, make a case, then, yeah, you could technically support a 200-mile-per-hour hurricane. We were pretty close With Milton last year, we got up to 185-mile-an-hour winds when we were gusting beyond 200 in the core, in the eye wall, so... Is this season supposed to be less intense than last season? That is very difficult to determine. Excellent question, but it's very difficult to determine because there are a couple of variables that would suggest that the Southeast and the East Coast of the United States need to watch, and the Caribbean, I do think, as well as Central America, are going to have to be on guard from start to finish. We had a lot of sloppy systems spin up on both sides of the hurricane season last year that dropped a lot of rainfall, created flood conditions and all sorts of other hazards out there for our neighbors to the south. And I do think that's going to be a risk. In August, September, and October, that's when we'll have more of the systems for everybody. But even in June, July, and then October, November, we'll have to watch very close for the Caribbean, Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, the Antilles, the ABC Islands down off the coast of South America. Everybody down there will have to watch. And Train Spotter Florida, that's another thing too, is I really don't want anybody to be lulled into a false sense of security. I think this hurricane season has an even greater psychological aspect tied to it than last year. Last year, everybody was saying, oh yeah, big time season, 30, 50 named storms, you name it, everyone's getting a landfall. And that didn't happen. So now, as a result, everybody who has egg on their faces, especially the folks who went with 30-plus named storms, they're reining it in. They're like, okay, you know what, let's be a little more realistic. We're going to get like 15 named storms. It's going to be, an average season. We got to be careful with that. I really think that could come back and bite us if we drop our guard way too much. Like, yeah, we have some cooling going on in the extreme eastern Atlantic, but at the same time, what else has really changed from last year? What else has really changed? If we're still anticipating an ENSO neutral like a large majority of 2024 was until the backside of October, then we really don't have very many puzzle pieces changing that dramatically. I mean, I'm sure there's other things out there that we could dig up that have kind of adjusted from 2024, especially the warmth, but the lack of significant warmth that we had last year could actually be more of a benefit to the tropical cyclones than others are speculating. Like somebody had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of folks out there who are going very bearish because last year was a big bust, even though it wasn't. They're already thinking this is going to be an average hurricane season, nothing to worry about. That's why the key takeaway here is it only takes one, and in my opinion, we still have fairly high odds and probabilities of seeing a couple of very destructive landfalls. And that's for everybody. I'm not talking about just Florida or just Louisiana or just the Caribbean. I mean for everybody. And I know that's easy to say because it kind of leaves it up to ambiguity. It's like the end of the Halloween 1978 film where is Michael Myers alive? Is he disappearing? Yada, yada, yada. But in my personal and professional opinion, we all need to take this hurricane season very seriously, just like we did last year. If we're still forecasting 14 to 18 named storms on average, possibly a little higher than that, then that still puts us on par with 2024 and how impactful it was. We could still get, on a reasonable scale, 3 to 5 systems landfalling in major populated areas. So can't safely call a season a bust until it ends. Calling it a bust in August is terrible luck. I completely agree. And I still think that despite what others are speculating about the cool waters and X, Y, and Z parts of the world, this hurricane season still has the potential to be impactful. And that's why we have the old metaphor and old adage of it only takes one. So we should all definitely stay on our toes with this. I'm going to stay on my toes. I'm still taking it serious. I think Florida's going to see another 1 or 2 systems hit this hurricane season. I really do. Especially in October. I really do think October is going to be our month once again. We're going to be tracking a fall/Halloween system. So we'll see. Yeah, NOAA will release, I believe, second week of May, sometime around May. Early to mid-May is when they'll release. And then we're also going to continue to get updates from different people. The TSR will update their forecast this month. Weatherbell will update their forecast this month. I think we have a couple of other entities that are going to start to prepare their forecasts, like Penn State, U of A, etc. And then we also still have a couple more batches of climate data to come through. It definitely was not. I don't know how anybody can say that last year was a bust for everybody besides Florida. Everybody technically got in on the action. Texas got hit. Louisiana got hit. Florida got nailed 3 different times. We had a lot of stuff in the Central American area. We had a lot of stuff for the Caribbean. The only place that really lucked out technically was the Bahamas. That's it. Because then Helene went up and made sure to hit everybody on the eastern seaboard. That's why in Tennessee and the Carolinas there was prolific flooding. So everybody got a little bit of the action last hurricane season. The only people who really didn't was the Bahamas. Bahamas, they were scot-free. You could have taken a Carnival or a Royal Caribbean cruise out there if you wanted to. Everybody else, forget about it. We had stuff in Mexico, stuff in the Yucatan, stuff in Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Cuba. We had Oscar that technically Oscar did impact the Turks and Caicos and extreme eastern Cuba, so I guess there was that one. But yeah, so 1992 was a good example of it only takes one, the year of Andrew. Yeah, and Andrew was a very late storm. Could the Atlantic warm up more than what we see now? Yes, Richard Lee Green. I really do think it will. Let me show you why. So let's go over to one of our teleconnections. There we go. Let's go to the NAO. So if you look, we're in a negative phase of the NAO right now. Let me go to the long range. There we go. So we're in a negative phase of the NAO right now, which is a weakened pressure pattern over the Atlantic. And then we're going to back build it for a little bit for the middle portions of April. So that could potentially keep it, where it is now. But then if you look, both the extended GFS all the way through the month of May and the Euro weeklies are thinking we're going to be dipping down into a negative pattern far more than a positive pattern. Sure, we get a little bit of a resurgence right there, but that is a very short duration. That's only 7 days. Only 7 days, and then we spend pretty much a large majority of the back end of April in negative phase, and then we spend a large majority of May in that negative, if not neutral phase. So there is going to be some warmth. And then on top of that, just as we get into the summertime, if you think about it from a solar perspective, the Earth is going to continue to kind of orbit the sun, and we're going to get more of that direct long-wave radiation right over top, or that UV radiation directly over top the equator. That's what brings the intertropical convergence zone towards the north. So even if we don't get a ton of a relaxing in our trade winds, we're going to get a little bit more warming out there just because of the time of the year. It'll happen. It'll just, it won't be anything spectacular. We're not going to warm up 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees, but it will definitely pull up a little bit more than what it is right now. And if you look, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, we are already starting to see a bit of that warmth ongoing. Yeah, there you go. Let me go to the Eastern Atlantic. If you look, that's the Pacific. If you go to the tropical Atlantic, we're already starting to see a little bit of the warmth sneaking in out there where it's coldest. The Canary Current is already starting to kick on, it looks like, and bring down some of that warmth. So we shall see. We will definitely see. And look at how the ENSO is still holding strong in that cool neutral / weak La Nina phase. We haven't really trended away from there since backside of March. So definitely a lot to watch. Definitely a lot of things to keep tabs on. I have my work cut out for me big time. But this here really sums it up. Really sums it up, I think. We have our warmest waters right through here. Warmest waters right through there, which could suggest a pretty dominant subtropical high spinning out there over the Atlantic. Less of a shot at seeing an extension of a trough down over the eastern United States because of the warmth and the lift that's being provided from close to home, the Gulf Stream, the Gulf itself, the Caribbean, near the Greater Antilles. I really do think. So we'll have to wait and see. We still have time. Don't let this lull you into a false sense of security. Just because it's really cool out there right now doesn't mean a dang thing. Because we've had very cold years out there. I'll pull up for example, let's go to 2005, and I'll switch us to the World Center. If you look at 2005, for example, We had really cool anomalies close to home in the Gulf and across the subtropics. We had a lot of focused warmth out there, but believe it or not, we had more action spawning in to the subtropical Atlantic, and a lot of the main storms that we had gotten hit hard by in 2005 didn't get going until they got into what would be considered relatively cooler waters. Katrina and Rita only started to develop as they got closer to Florida, and then they exploded over the loop current in the Gulf. And those were long track waves. We had a ton of subtropical action over what would be the cooler waters of the subtropics. And then let's not forget 2004. I'm surprised they didn't put 2004 as an analog, but I'm sure there were reasons why. If you look at 04, even more so, look at how you had cool anomalies all through the Caribbean off the southeast coast, and that's where features like Charlie, Francis, Jean, etc. blew up. So it's not like we have a huge saving grace out there in the form of cold Atlantic waters. It's not like it's that tremendously cool out there. It's just that it's cooler than average for the time of year. Even 2017, if you look, we had an anomalously cool Atlantic basin, but the Gulf was loaded, the Caribbean was loaded, and the subtropics, mid-latitudes were loaded with a cool neutral out there. This is probably one of our best analogs, in my opinion. So it's not like it's completely unfavorable for tropical cyclone development. It's only a matter of time before those warmer waters begin to start surging towards the north, and then it's game on. So... But that's all she wrote, folks. We're going to go ahead and cut the live stream. This was definitely a bit longer than I'd wanted to go. We almost hit our traditional hour mark like we normally do. But it was a great discussion, and thank you so much again for all the donations that we got tonight. It's definitely inspiring, and it's going to keep me cranking out the content for the rest of the month because we're going to be busy. We're going to be busy. I already found if you're local to the area, as a matter of fact, and you want to meet in person, put it out there right now. If you are local to the Central Florida area and you would like to meet in person, myself and a couple of others from WKMG are going to be available and present at I wouldn't call it a conference. It's more of like a seminar, or I will just say an event. It'll be at a public event May 3rd in Osceola County at Lakefront. It's called the 2025 Before the Storm. It's hosted by the Osceola County Emergency Management Department, and I volunteered alongside a couple of others to include a couple of our other meteorologists out there from WKMG. So we're going to be there with a booth set up. We're going to be talking tropics. We're going to be on a panel. I'm really excited. It's going to be a phenomenal experience. So if you're local to Central Florida or you don't mind making a trip on a Saturday, come on out, show some support, have fun. We'll have a whole KMG booth and presence set up. I'm going to be speaking alongside Kevin Guthrie, a couple of other West 2 meteorologists who will be out there, National Weather Service, and then the folks from the Osceola Department of Emergency Management. So it should be a good time. If you have the ability to do so and you're free and can come out to the Kissimmee area, feel free. It'd be great to see you in person. That'd be awesome. TRG, of course, thank you so much for tuning in. It means a lot to see you, and I'm not sure if ONW is still in here, but regardless, it's always great to have other weather content creators in the chat. It means a lot, for sure. I don't comment, but I be watching you guys' streams a lot more than you would think. I'm always popping in and out, especially during these severe weather phases. I'm always popping in and out, but I have it playing, and I'm watching. I don't ever comment. I know that's a filthy habit of mine, but I still watch. I'll still tune in. But yeah. Alrighty, everybody. We'll see you next time. If you have any additional questions, drop them in the comments section down below. I'll make it a point to get back to you. Or if you'd like to just hold your questions, write them down, set a reminder. We'll be back again Saturday evening for our European model discussion. We'll have the new seasonal outlook from the Euro. We'll break all that down, talk a little bit more about what could possibly happen as we go through the month of May. But this is it. The key takeaways here is this is when you should start your preparations. And I'm not saying that to be Mr. Hypey or Mr. Fearmonger or anything like that. This is when you prepare. If you think about it, it's like working out for a bodybuilding competition or a marathon or whatever it is, or preparing for a test. When do you prepare for these types of things? Way in advance. If you're trying to get shredded to get on stage for bodybuilding, you start an 8, 12, 15, 18-week program. If you're trying to run a marathon, you get started months in advance. If you're preparing for a big final exam, you prepare at least, in my opinion, 3, 4, 5 weeks in advance so you can get fresh and retain all the material. You don't get prepared for a test or a marathon or anything big like that within 2 days. You don't do that. So you should treat this the same as well. And when I say prepare, just make sure you have a plan. That's what I mean by prepare. That's another thing I want to cover as we get closer to this hurricane season, and that's why I love the opportunities that I'm going to have to speak to folks, is there are different phases to preparation. Right now in the month of April, to prepare, you should be going over a blueprint. You should have your phone or a piece of paper with your family and friends, and you should be jotting down, if this happens or this happens or this happens, this is the course that we're going to take from there. I'm not saying go out and buy water and canned goods right now. No, that's part of your preparation. That's part of your plan. Right now, you should be blueprinting and constructing your plan, at which point you have in the plan itself when it is to go and get your supplies. So the conference begins on April 14th, Roxanne, so I'll be in New Orleans from that Monday through Friday for the Hurricane Conference. I'm also really excited about that. I have to finish ironing out the details on that. But already, everybody in the audience, you've been a spectacular group, as always. Wonderful community. I love each and every one of you. We're going to be back again very soon. This is when we start getting busy. I'm going to be busy, crunching numbers, data, taking notes, and prepping for all sorts of different streams and content everywhere. This is it. That's the final countdown. It is April 3rd. Soon to be April 4th. We're going to start our recurring tropical updates once we hit May 15th. So for me, this is definitely the final countdown. Soon as May 15th hits, bam, we're pretty much treating it as hurricane season has started. It technically has, just in the East Pac, not necessarily the Atlantic, but you never know. So May 15th is when this channel and whoever else wants to join in with that, we're going to start our recurring tropical updates just like we did last year, and we're going to be cranking out the content left and right. So we'll see you guys again soon. Willow's complaining at the door, so it's time for me to get off. And we'll see you again on Saturday. No doubt about it. But until next time, have a fantastic rest of your night. A solid Friday if we don't get a chance to talk or you don't leave a comment in the comment section. Talk to you again on Saturday. Until then, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.